Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are watching this. What a pleasure it is today to welcome two authors who write just really different books, but they're good friends and they are psyched to do this event together. Actually, they proposed doing this event together. So, yay, I get to just sit back and listen. Jeff Abbott, his new book, An Ambush of Widows, is absolutely fabulous. And if any of you read the Dare book, the name of which is escaping me, can one of you help me out here? What's it called? The Last Thing He Told Me? Is that what the title is? I think. Anyway, there are some similarities, although they're very different books. But if you really like the Laura Dare book, you will truly love An Ambush of Widows. So Jeff has written two series, the Whit Motley and Sam Capper series, but for a while he's been writing standalones. So maybe they'll talk about why the switch. Susan, on the other hand, is at book 10 of her fabulous series, and this is called The Hollywood Spy. And Maggie Hope is an American whom we first met in London as secretary to Mr. Churchill. So not coincidentally, her first book is called Mr. Churchill's Secretary. And this book brings her back to America, to Hollywood, and she doesn't really love it. I think she's anxious to go back to England. So that's a kind of a nice twist in the whole thing. And I will say, Susan, did you happen to read the essay in the New York Times a little while ago about historical fiction?
Oh, which one was that?
Well, it wasn't reviews. It was more of an essay just on historical fiction and why we should read it. And one of the things
I did
said,
read that. Yes.
it was I
Excellent piece.
quoted it in my review of your book, and now, of course, I don't have it with me, but I thought it was so apropos because it was basically saying, that it's, I mean, we've all said this before, but by understanding the past, we might be able to understand the present, although I honestly don't think that there's any way we could understand the last 5 years, so I'm going to pass on to it. Let you go. Anyway, the authors are all psyched up to talk to each other, so I'm going to turn it over to, why don't we start with you, Jeff, and you take over, because alphabetically, that's correct.
Okay, all right. Well, welcome everyone. Susan and I are both so excited to be here and to have new books out for y'all to read. I thought maybe we could start off by each telling you a little bit about the new book, kind of what it's about. Barbara kind of set us up a little bit, but we could go into a little more detail. So I'll start. An Ambush of Widows is about two women whose husbands are killed together. And yet there is no reason that they know of that their husbands, who were complete strangers to each other, would have been together or had any kind of dealings. And so these two women, who are very different, have to sort of unite to investigate their husbands' murders. And in the course of this, their lives are changed and their secrets are dealt with. And I really kind of had a blast writing it. But that gives you an idea of the plot of the story. And I can explain the title also if asked. So
that's one of my questions. That was one of my questions.
An ambush is the collective noun for a group of widows. And when I didn't have a title when I was about 100 pages into writing the book, and I thought, what do you call like more than one widow together? And then I saw that it was an ambush of widows, and I was like, sometimes the title just falls from the sky onto you. And fortunately, my publisher really liked it as well. So, but that is the idea, is that is this group of widows. So Susan, this is the 10th Maggie Hope book. What can you tell us about the Hollywood Spy to sort of whet our appetite?
Well, we are now up to year 1943 in World War II, and Maggie, as Barbara said, is going back to the United States. She's going back to Los Angeles, and she expects to be coming to a country where everyone's standing shoulder to shoulder and fighting together, and everyone's fighting against the Axis. And that is true, and it's also not true, because there's still a lot of dissension. There are still a lot of people arguing about things they were arguing about in the 30s. And not everybody is really, really psyched about this war. So it's an interesting place for her to land, and it's just not what she expects.
Well, I'd like to go ahead and ask the first question to you about the Hollywood Spy. I love TCM. I love old classic movies. And I think we have this idea of the 1940s being, this golden age of Hollywood. And when I started reading the book, it became clear very, very quickly that Hollywood and Los Angeles at that time, even when, like you said, a country standing shoulder to shoulder, is riven with division. And you kind of, I was not aware of these things like the Zoot Suit riots or the KKK's presence in Los Angeles. I'm from the South. We think of the KKK as being here in the 30s and 40s. We don't necessarily think of it being elsewhere. Can you talk a little bit about why you chose that as one of the themes, one of the sources of conflict in the novel?
Sure. I read this wonderful book called Hitler in Los Angeles. It's by Stephen R. Ross, and it was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. And actually, it's funny because Jeff knows my husband. My husband works for the Jim Henson Company. He's a Muppet. And he was doing the Muppets at the Hollywood Bowl. I kid you not, this is real. And he picked me up for a present. He picked me up the book Hitler in Los Angeles, because what do you get your historical mystery writing wife? Not diamonds, but a nice book. But
Hitler.
But it did lead to this book because I read it and I didn't know anything about Los Angeles in the 30s and 40s. I really thought of it as just like a place where they made planes and a place where they pumped out, movie propaganda, and that's about it. And I learned so much about Los Angeles in the 30s, and not only what was going on with, the KKK, and yes, I'm sorry, they did come from the American South and they went to California, but there were also fascist groups. There was the German American Bund. There was the Silver Shirts, which was, like the brown shirts. And there were all these different organizations, and they were actually trying to consolidate. And there was this man, real life man, and this is what the book is about, Leon Lewis, who basically did intelligence during World War I and saw the rise of Hitler and saw what was happening in LA, and put together a group of spies to infiltrate all these Nazi organizations to keep an eye on what they were doing. And they were planning some horrific things that never happened, but horrific things.
Oh, can I stick in a comment and say, I grew up in the Midwest. I'm from Chicago, actually, Winnetka, and Wisconsin, right over the border, and Missouri, St. Louis in particularly nearby, had enormous numbers of German settlers, and so very large German communities. And it was a big thing during the war. We know that the Japanese Americans were interned, a lot of them, in California and Hawaii, but the German and the Italian Americans really weren't, although a lot of things went on. But so I wasn't surprised, Susan, by the Germans in Los Angeles. Boom, I was knocked out by the KKK. I'm with Jeff. I thought they didn't come over the Mason-Dixon line. So I was just like, really?
It's true. It's true. Actually, Anaheim, California was nicknamed Klanaheim because of the high number of Klansmen that were in that part of Southern California. Yeah. It was really a big thing.
That's what I love in the best historical fiction. And I do want to ask you another question about all this, but
sure.
But because I have a history major, I was a history major, history and English double major. I have a history degree, and I have never written historical fiction just because I find it intimidating to think about doing. So I've always kind of wanted to do it, but I'm just not brave enough. I'm not brave like you. So
do it. No, I'm not brave enough to do present day stuff.
But it's. I mean, when you find something like that, you read this book that your husband thoughtfully brought back to you. Is that the spark of the idea? Do you think I could send Maggie Hope to Hollywood to deal with this issue or to talk about this issue? I mean, or do you think ever that it could be a standalone, or how do you sort of arrive at that decision creatively?
Oh, well, the nice thing, so I read the book and I was blown away by it, and I knew I wanted to write about it. And the really nice thing is in book 5, Mrs. Roosevelt's confidant, a character named John Sterling, who is Maggie's ex-fiance, actually leaves and goes to Hollywood. So he was already there. Mm-hmm. So he was a good character to sort of have already in place. So it wasn't that much of a catch for me to sort of figure out a way for them to communicate and get back together. And she ends up going back to Los Angeles, because she's helping him solve what could be a murder, but is deemed an accident. And also one of her best friends is going to be dancing in one of those Hollywood movies, like the Hollywood Canteen movie. So she has some reasons for going, and I just thought it all kind of worked out. And then just for the second part of your question, I've been so enamored of this. Enamored's not the right word, I guess, but I've just been so fascinated by this book that I'm actually doing my first standalone after this. So Maggie Hope will continue. Don't worry, there will be plenty more Maggie books, and they're actually under contract. But I'm doing my first standalone, and it's going to be about Los Angeles in the 1930s and this sort of build up to World War II. And it's going to focus on this Jewish spy organization.
That was not a planted question, Polita.
That was not a planted question, people.
I did not know she was thinking of doing that, so, or that she is planning on doing it. So, but I get that question a lot. How do you know when idea is for a standalone or for a series? And so I just, I wondered if you had dealt with the same thing. So
the other thing, and I'm sure you deal with this in your books too, is that, well, the last one was quite dark. The King's Justice was actually quite dark, and Maggie sort of fought a lot of her personal demons. And I just visually and atmospherically wanted to get her back into the sunshine. I just thought for the readers and for me and for Maggie, we all wanted a little vacation. I mean, although it turns out to be quite not quite a vacation, but we all wanted a change of scene. So
yeah, that sometimes the emotional weight of what you've written can weigh on you, and you want to do something slightly different. And it's nice in a series if you have the flexibility to do that by changing locales or what have you. So
I have a question for you, Jeff.
Okay.
Well, no, it's just that, the tropes that we deal with in crime fiction, there's usually, the book opens with someone dead, and 99.9% of the time it's a woman, usually a young and beautiful woman who is dead. And then a man investigates. So you start the book with two men who are dead, and then they're widows who do not know each other at the beginning of the book. They investigate that. So I loved the way you turned that trope on its head, and you gave agency to these women.
Well, I have killed off a lot of men and women in the books. So.
No, I didn't mean that. I just like seeing the story told that way.
I think my if I count An Ambush of Widows, the last 4 books have been standalones, and in 2 of them, the death of a male triggers the female to investigate. That sounds so zoological, doesn't it? Like we're talking about praying mantises or what have you.
It's technique, though. I mean, it's
in another one, it's the disappearance of her mother triggers the main character to investigate. I don't think really about. I understand what you're saying about damsels in distress, and neither of the widows is anything like a professional investigator. One is a former journalist, but lives a very wealthy, very privileged life. The other one is sort of like an information broker, like doing background checks on companies or people. And so she's a little bit more investigatively minded, but she has not in criminal, type of stuff. And so I sort of asked myself, I mean, a lot of times in sort of suburban suspense, we have this nice luxury that we get to see people in their ordinary everyday lives before we snatch it all away. And here in this one, Kirsten North is at home in New Orleans and gets a phone call, an anonymous phone call telling her that her husband has been shot to death in Austin, and she thinks he's in New York City on a business trip, and she panics and ends up, but she shows she has the heart of investigator because she immediately goes to Austin to see if this could possibly be true, because she can't find out anything else otherwise. And to me, the challenge was not so much damsels in distress, is that it's really hard to write about people who are struck with grief of this magnitude, because if it's me, I'm curled up in the corner, right? But I wanted them both to feel anger and outrage, and that was sort of what moved them both forward. But I wanted to have sort of that puzzling open that she has no idea why her husband would be there, And this is a very good marriage, right? I look at two different marriages in this book. One marriage is really solid. They have been through hell together. It's the two of them against the world, and someone took him, and she ain't letting that slide, right? And the other wife, Flora Zhang, had a career, gave it all up when she married this technology entrepreneur, investor. She lives an extremely comfortable, structured life, and she really thought she knew her husband, and she didn't. And as sort of as the story unfolds. And so I just wanted I kind of wanted to emotionally handcuff these two women together,
Mhm.
because I knew they would be in conflict, and I thought that would be interesting, but they would also learn more about themselves. But I always felt they had to be active from the beginning. They couldn't wait for someone else to sort of solve the problem. Kirsten definitely is not a waiter for someone else to solve the problem. Flora maybe might try waiting, but then when people start saying to you, well, you had 50 million reasons to want him gone, and she has a child and she can't go to jail, she just, it was to that way, it was like finding the ways to really, really, really motivate them.
Well, I thought you did
They're
such a
great.
brilliant job of showing two different people dealing with trauma in two incredibly different ways. And I totally bought that as part of Kirsten's trauma, she would go jump on this plane because she was just in that like adrenaline filled panic mode. So I totally got that. I thought that was really brilliant. Um, what is the challenge of having two characters who've experienced so much trauma at the beginning? Like, they're not investigators who have a certain distance from the crimes. They're the widows. So how does that work for you as a writer?
Well, like I said, I would be curled up in the corner, unable to
Right, me too.
with this kind of familial loss. And I couldn't let them do that. The story has to move on. So I think their anger sort of pushes them forward. And then as they're each finding out more, because they know their husband must have, each of them knows the husband must have been keeping a huge lie from them. And
Mhm.
so then you want to know that truth. And I think Flora just wants to know the truth, so she's not blamed for the murders. And Kirsten thinks of herself as a bullet she's going to aim at whoever took her husband from her. And their own past, their own background sort of come into play about this. But in some ways, just switching back between the point of view of each of them, it felt like a natural rhythm, almost like a song, because one of them would be really hepped up and the other would be slightly calmer and figuring stuff out, and then they could get hepped up. And so it gave a nice rhythm to me for the writing. The book I wrote before this, Never Ask Me, is about a family of four dealing with a murder, and I had 4 points of view in that. It was really hard. And so this felt like slightly like a vacation afterwards to only do it for two. And then there's one other character from his point of view that we see some things. But yeah, that was, to me, just I couldn't let them wallow in their grief. But the other challenge that you asked, how was it a challenge to write them? I wanted them to show the happiness of their lives and the goodness of their lives. And that had to come more in reflection and finding those moments, sort of like the little cracks in the action where they could stop and take a breath. And that's when the light would come in and in those cracks, and let them think about what they had lost and how it was going to change their lives. And how were they going to go on with their lives? Even in a somewhat unhappy marriage like Flora's, the loss of a spouse is still devastating, right?
Of course.
That it was a homicide is devastating. And her child has lost his father, and that's devastating. And so she has to rethink her entire life. And so that was, to me, that was sort of the challenge, is like, how can I show all that while keeping the action going? And I just had to look for those opportunities in the rhythm of the story where it felt right.
You did that really well. So
Thank you. That was a really
bravo.
long-winded answer too.
No, it was a great answer. Actually, that brings me to another question. So this book, they end up in Austin, and this is your fourth. Is it the fourth book set in Austin or set partially in?
Set in Austin, yeah.
So
yeah.
what is the pull of this mystical city?
Well, Austin has, well, first of all, I grew up in Austin. My family moved to Austin when I was 6 months old, and I married a native. And people think we're part of some program to get people married who have been here a really, really long time, because lots of people haven't even been here 5 years. We're now the 11th largest city in the country.
Wow.
And the growth has been, we're about to pass San Jose, and the growth has just been unreal. And it's had a huge effect on the city in terms of people experiencing homelessness, people getting priced out of houses, houses selling, people not moving in, people reselling them 4 months later for $200,000 more. It's just been this crazy, crazy growth. And so that brings a lot of conflict and drama. And before all of that happened, Austin is this very, very livable, nice, creative, fun city. And it's
right.
trying to
keep Austin weird, right?
Yes, keep Austin weird. We're trying to keep Austin. A lot of the people that move here want to preserve that part of the personality of the city. I think it's going to be a real challenge. I mean, before I was writing these books, I was writing the Sam Capra series, where Sam is an ex-CIA agent who owns bars all over the world. And so that that always involved me going and traveling to the city where that book would be set. Downfall was in San Francisco, Inside Man was in Miami and Puerto Rico, Adrenaline was in London and Amsterdam. And I kind of got tired of traveling. So I said, I'm going to write about home. And I also felt like not very many other suspense writers are really centering stuff in Austin. Meg Gardner has written a novel set here. There are some other really wonderful authors who write about Austin, but I felt like in terms of like suburban suspense, I could sort of really lean into it here. So that's where Blame came from. And then I wrote The Three Beths and Never Ask Me, and now Ambush of Widows. And I just enjoy trying to bring sort of the sensibility of the city to people who maybe have misperceptions about it, or they've heard this about Austin, or they've heard that about Austin. And it's just such a dynamic place that I really have enjoyed writing.
So Jeff, I had so fun. Before you go on, Susan, excuse me, tell me a bit about suburban suspense, because there's a lot of confusion about trust no one and psychological suspense and suburban suspense and so forth. What is it that you think suburban suspense is?
Well, I think it's usually people living in a suburb who are, that's one first point to establish, who are caught up in some sort of crime or some sort of action that might come from the past or for something that happens in their present. And all the things that they have sort of valued in their life, like the safe neighborhood and that their children will be in a good school, or they'll have this good career, these aspects of the American dream are somehow put into peril. And you have a cast of characters who normally may not be seen as being typical for a crime novel, but someone's committed a crime and someone's been the victim of a crime, and what are their motivations and such. It's not necessarily something with international intrigue. I mean, I guess it could, but to me, it's more of arising from people being fearful that they will sort of lose their place on a ladder that they feel that they have been climbing or holding on to desperately to a rung, and there's going to be a loss of both economic loss, social status, all the other kinds of stuff that I think we sort of attach to life in the suburbs.
That's a wonderful answer, because, I find myself, excuse me, country noir is one way to describe a particular genre, or, we have urban noir or urban this or that. And I find it interesting that, the location is part of the definition of what you're writing. So, I think, Harlan kind of, set a standard for suburban noir. Linwood Barclay writes wonderful suburban noir. You write wonderful suburban noir. So I'm looking for the things that you all have in common where we call it that. And then, over on another side, we have Chris Offutt and Ace Atkins and people writing Daniel Waddrell country noir. And, I'm not sure there is an urban. I mean, do you think there's an urban kind of, all the people who set their books? Is Susan's book urban noir? It's Los Angeles. I mean,
Well,
it's
it's not that whole Los
question.
Angeles noir, Raymond Chandler, etc. I mean, that's a
I
huge.
think noir started as urban noir, because I
Yeah.
think of Hammond and Chandler and Dorothy B. Hughes and these classical practitioners of the form, people who define the form. So I think the idea of it has certainly spread. I mean, I think of, would there be historical noir? Noir set in periods other than the 30s and the 40s. I don't know.
Noir came around after the 40s. It was a post World War II thing. So, but yeah, you can use that lens to look backwards. I think it's like looking at the dark underbelly of whatever place. One of my favorites is Tartan noir, the Scottish.
Yes.
That just I think that's so funny. I told that to some Scottish friends. They loved it.
I think my larger point was that one of the, in thinking about crime fiction is that sort of boring thing about landscape can be character or be a character. But
Absolutely.
I think in most crime fiction, it's very hard to get away from the location as an integral part of, of how you talk about the book and why people like the book. So I do. I mean, I grew up on like Tony Hillerman and Robert Parker, two very different writers, but two very intense communities, landscapes. One's the Navajo Res, we're in Boston. And I do think that that crime fiction is often defined in part by where it is, which is why I asked you. But also suspense has become such a broad term. I keep trying to think about how to sort of narrow it down a bit so that we can grasp what it is.
Well, a lot of times when I talk to readers who are more casual readers, I tend to use the broader terms because they may not know exactly what someone would mean by noir or a cozy or things like that. Sure. But if you say like, thriller or a more traditional mystery or an English style mystery, they'll think Agatha Christie or something along those lines. And it's just, I'm also lazy, so.
Well, there's an interesting triple question that I learned in library school a long time ago, the reference interview, it's called, the very quick reference interview, which for years I have used at the Poison Pen. And you get somebody coming in and they say, sell me a good book. Great. There's a whole universe suddenly that opened up. So the three questions you always ask them is, what do you do? Where do you live? i.e. getting to them in the way we just described. And who have you read you liked? And, you can triangulate from those three questions. You can almost always get to a book that somebody's really going to like based on those three questions. But one of them is always about where do you live, meaning, what landscape is going to interest you. Or you could also say, where have you been or where would you like to go, which works the same way. Right. Yep. So anyway, I'm interrupting, but there we go.
That's great, but that's like during the pandemic, we were taking vacations through books.
Absolutely. Right, which is why historical fiction really took a surge, Susan, and during the pandemic. It was an escape not only from where we are, but physically, but where we are emotionally.
Absolutely.
And I have a historical fiction question to ask you, Susan, and I know you've been asked this before, but I'm always fascinated to know what other authors' process is, especially how do you like do the research? How do you organize your research? How do you decide what to use and what not to use in the research? And I'm going to ask it sort of as a broad question because I think, I've recommended your books or recommended other historical authors to friends, and we always wonder about this. How do you find all this out, and how do you organize it, and how do you keep track of it, and how do you bring it to such vivid life?
Well, I usually start with the germ of an idea for the story. So for The Hollywood Spy, it was reading Hitler in Los Angeles. And then I started to think about my characters, how I was going to get Maggie Hope there, who else would be there, who else that she knew from before, but who else would she meet. And then I started to do the research about what was going on. And I started to, research in more depth. And I started to, just make certain decisions. Like when they came, they would stay at the Chateau Marmont. And I did research there, and I learned a lot about this other hotel, the Garden of Allah Hotel. And so that's the hotel that was across the street. And
That's a real place.
it was a
That
real
was a real
place.
place. Okay.
It's
I didn't know if
apocryphal.
you made it up.
No, that's a real place, and it's supposed to be the subject of the song. They tore down Paradise and put up a parking lot.
Oh, yeah.
So that was the Garden of
Mitchell,
Allah.
Big Yellow
Yeah.
Taxi.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, and then the more I researched the Garden of Allah, the more I found this whole like sort of Hollywood sub community. It was a place where a lot of people in the business could go and really be themselves. And when I say be themselves, I mean they could be LGBTQ and out, and there was their own security at the hotel, so they weren't dealing with the police, and so they were quite safe. And so that led to a whole nother sort of plot line and things to research, like what was that like during 1943.
So are you reading like source materials, like newspapers, books?
Newspapers.com. Oh yeah, that's like, but yeah, books. I love getting things firsthand. So people's memoirs. There was a wonderful memoir, for instance, by this woman named Vera Zorina, and she was in some amazing films. She was George Balanchine's dancer and also his wife. So there was like great sort of source materials about both living in LA during the 40s.
Inspiration for Sarah?
Yeah, so Sarah's a ballet dancer. So a lot of the research on Vera went into Sarah. But basically I do just a ton of research and everything that I can think of. And then when I start writing, I just have to keep researching.
So, but do you keep it? I mean, I'm asking like tactical, do you keep just like PDFs and you just organize them into folders, or I mean, I would worry I would do all the research and then not look back at it and forget about all the gold I might have in there.
No, you know what? It's so funny because I've tried Scrivener. Okay, this is really nerdy, but do you use Scrivener?
Yes, I use Scrivener.
Okay, I am not smart enough to use Scrivener, Jeff. I cannot watch all those videos to do Scrivener. So I have all these different Word files about like, so I'll have, like the Garden of Allah Hotel, and I'll have Chateau Marmont Hotel, and I'll have like the KKK and the Zoot Suit riots. And so I have all these things. So then when I go to write about that or even mention it, I sort of like go through and pick out the most important detail that will fit what I'm writing about.
So it's just, you organize it according to topic and a collection of Word files, and then you draw on those as you.
Right. And I do review that, like I do go through them quite a bit. So it's all sort of in my head. So I know where to cherry pick.
So you can get like Los Angeles newspapers from 1943 online.
Absolutely. Newspapers.com.
Most people know that.
No, like, and you can go to the LA Times. You can go to the LA Times and get their whole, I was going to say backlist. That's not what they call them, but all of the issues. And then there's also newspapers.com, and you can get all of these, like the Sacramento Bee and, all of these different smaller papers that don't even exist anymore. So you can look up, if Maggie's in Los Angeles in July, 15th, 1943, you can just look up everything that was reported on that day.
See, I just feel like I've learned something. I just did not
know. You can do this. You can do this, Jeff. I believe in you. I believe in you.
My editor will come after you if you talk me into writing a historical novel, because that's, I don't think, what they want me to do next. But so can I ask a second part of that? Because I know authors always talk about whether they're outliners or in planners, or if they're pantsers, which is the term when you're flying by the seat of your pants. Since you have to do so much research, and that has a shaping effect on the story, presumably, are you more of an outliner, or do you just sort of absorb all this research and say, I'm going to see where the story takes me, and then I'll see what else I need to research?
I do usually start with an outline. One of my tricks is to write down everything I know. This is before I even start, but I write down everything I know about all the characters, like, because you do have a lot of things in the back of your mind, and then I do sort of work out a story and an outline, and then I usually end up throwing it out the window because nothing ever works out as planned. And I don't know, I feel like I'm always throwing away like the first 50 pages of whatever I write, as painful as that is. So yeah. Right.
That makes me want to cry.
Right. Yeah, me too.
I threw out 200 pages once, so I understand the pain.
Whoa.
I understand the pain. Now I will answer the question for myself. I am some more of an outliner than I used to be. And also my editor asked me for more of a detailed outline. That I think my publisher likes to have it. I don't know if that's because they don't trust me or because I've wandered off campus before, but
No, it helps them set up their publicity, Jeff. I mean, they're thinking about marketing before you've ever written the book.
They are. And I think that I think I feel better if I have an idea of where that end goal is. So I tend to write one that's like 8 to 10 pages for my editor and my agent and I, and it's kind of high level. And it might have some cheat codes in it, like suddenly she discovers the truth. And I don't know how she discovers the truth. And that will come back to haunt me, that decision not to lay it out.
Right, because that's future Jeff. Future Jeff will take care of it.
Exactly. But then I write like a 2-page one for the powers that be at the publisher. That's just shorter, like that the salespeople and the other editors can see. And that's usually a little harder to write than the longer one because you're just sort of trying to compress it and it can feel a little bit like jacket copy. But I do try to sort of stick to that outline. I have often found, though, you'll describe some supporting character and he or she will come on stage and they'll just be more active, right? Or I find in the outline I had too many characters and I need to start merging some of them to make them more active, more decisive, and to like make the emotional bonds between the characters closer. So I usually have to get rid of a couple of people, not like in a negative way that they get killed off, that they just sort of, I give their activities in the story or in the outline to another character to make that other character broader and more interesting. But it's like, but all the times I've deviated from an outline, they have never at any point come and said, well, here in the outline on page 3, Jeff, you'll note that person was going to die and they're still alive. What happened? It's like, well, the improvements to the story suggested themselves as I was going through. So.
Oh, I also use a whiteboard or like really big pieces of paper, and I put like names down and circle them and like make little arrows to like other characters and how they're all interwoven. And I did this talk with Mariah Fredericks, another historical fiction novelist, and she accused me of being like Carrie Matheson on Homeland. Because it was really messy.
Pinned up here, and she's having a nervous breakdown in front of all the data. Because there's like colors and scribbles and things crossed out. I literally have a cork board over here that has the color printout of the Ambush of Widows cover when they emailed it to me months ago, with a bunch of stickies that was supposed to outline stuff. And I put that together and then I didn't look at it. And then I bought a whiteboard back before our house burned down and did not replace it after the house burned down. And so I mean, the closest I've come to that is just taking like a sketchbook pad.
Yes.
And I'll write the person who dies or something at the center. And then it's like a spider web coming out. And then I also, as I write the names of the other characters, sometimes I'll say, why is there no connection between these two people? What if there was? That was maybe unsuspected or surprising. So I kind of like that organic way of building the story, but I still like the comfort of the outline, that where I've deluded myself into being 100% sure that I know where I'm going. But this is my other cheat that I'll share in case people writing this are interested. When, regardless of how away from the outline or on the outline I've gone, when I have about 100 pages left, I stop and I take a real deep breath and I reread everything, and then I re-outline the last 100 pages of the book, because I really, really, really want a battle plan to get to that end and to feel like I'm resolving the issues and I'm having emotional highs and emotional closures and all the things that you hope that you will have for at the end of a satisfying read. But that's my cheat that I do.
Well, I think that's a good one. And I am going to ask you perhaps later to help me with Scrivener, because I think that might help me and not be so Carrie Matheson-like.
I don't use everything in it. And actually, I started this book, the book I'm writing right now, which, Barbara, is not a standalone.
Oh, wonderful.
Filled the room. I was writing it in Word, but it's hard in the Mac version of Word to move sections around. Yeah. And it's really easy to do that in Scrivener. So I moved the manuscript over to Scrivener because I really needed to reorder a bunch of stuff. So, but
so
yes,
I have a question for Susan, since we're talking about structure that struck me when I was reading the book, Susan. And now that I know how you work, maybe I could answer it myself, but better you should answer it, which is, when you got to Hollywood and all, one of the fascinating subjects you explore is lavender marriages. I mean, we just moved past Gay Pride Month, June, so we're July, but we're close enough. But did you expect to be writing about that, or did you expect characters that in fact are engaged in a lavender marriage to appear in the book? Because I thought that was, I mean, it was like the Ku Klux Klan for me. I was really intrigued by it.
No, that was all because of some of the amazing books I read about the Garden of Allah Hotel. Mm-hmm. And the fact that people could live so openly and just be themselves. And it was this sort of haven for people, quote unquote, like that. The lesbian group was called Sewing Circles. And they often wore purple and violet. Bless you, bless you.
Thank you. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. But yeah, that was something that came about through the research. And then I realized like that was the situation with one character in particular. And I kind of ran with that.
I think it's a really interesting and important part of the book. After listening to you, I thought that it might have been something that came along and surprised you, that you didn't intentionally start out to make a part of the book. So that's really fascinating. Hollywood was full of so many secrets, I mean, it was
George Cukor's parties and,
Well, yeah, I mean, we look back on, did Natalie Wood really, fall overboard, or did somebody kill her? And, I mean, on and on. There are these amazing Hollywood stories and stuff they got away with. Because, you point that out so well, that because they had their own security and so forth, things could go on that, never made it into the regular investigative system, never made it into the public record. There were expensive people paid to, suppress stuff that went on. The gossip columnists, they're fascinating too. Sheila Graham and Hedda Hopper. You must have really had a good time with that.
Oh, Hedda Hopper, what a woman, right?
It was not all about the hats.
It's about the power.
When I was a kid, people are asked, like in the New York Times, they're always asking in that book, Ralph, what was the one book you hid from your parents? Well, in my case, it was the Hollywood, gossip magazines. I would sneak up to Winnetka to the Five and Dime with my dime, and I would buy whatever it was, Photoplay, I think was the title of one of them. But it was a really big deal to have Hedda and Sheila, who were huge rivals anyway, trying to reveal secrets. And one of the reasons it was so funny, I mentioned I grew up in Winnetka, but Rock Hudson was my grandmother's mailman back in the day, before, because I think it was might have been in the 30s in point of fact. But his name was Roy Fitzgerald, and he was this kind of skinny, gawky, nobody would ever have thought he'd turn into Rock Hudson person. But it really was, it wasn't until AIDS became such a terrible thing that anybody ever realized that all along, he'd been part of the gay community, and that had all been covered up. So, we see him with Doris Day and we think, what did they get up to? Answer, nothing. But so really, it's a place of amazing secrets. Put a spy story there. I thought was a brilliant thing for you to do.
It really is. And I don't know that I'd seen it before done that way. And that's one of the things I loved about the book, was that this seems like a great premise for it, and you've carried it so well, Susan, in your execution of it.
These real life spies were so inspiring. So there was Leon Lewis, who was this sort of the leader of the spy ring, but he and his colleagues, most of whom were Jewish, they hired or worked with people who were, what we would call WASPs, to infiltrate those groups and to who would pass. So there are a lot of Germans and a lot of, Northern European Americans, and they all were working together to bring down these Nazis. And I found that so amazing. And then the other thing that I found so fascinating about the book is there are so many unexplained deaths. There are so many unexplained deaths of those people who were spies, running the spy circles, and people who testified in the sedition trials. And nothing ever happened with these deaths. That nothing was ever proven. They were all sort of marked accidents, but one fell and hit his head, and the other choked on his cake at the Brown Derby, and there were all these really suspicious sort of deaths. And I was just like, this is a book. Like, this is so amazing. So all of those deaths are real.
Deaths, I was starting to smile because I thought you meant like Hollywood, but then you meant the people who were taking on this evil.
No, the people who
a whole series of deaths. So then, yes, I was like, oh no. But yeah, and no one tried to connect the numbers or to prove that there was maybe a wider reason for this.
Well, you know what? When it finally got down to 1944, and so they were tried in Sacramento in for state crimes, but they were also tried for federal crimes in Washington. And what happened was, finally, after a really sort of raucous and nasty trial, the judge died of mysterious circumstances. And it was declared, the sedition trial of 1944 was declared a mistrial.
Certainly there's some interesting echoes to today. I was thinking about your book when it was revealed in the Times maybe a week or two ago. Did you read about the woman who paid some, I can't remember whether they were actually conservatives, but anyway, they went undercover to in Wyoming to spy upon the Democratic Party. And I thought, my God, there we go again. It was very, very similar to things that go on in your story. One of the brilliances of your story, Susan, is that Maggie is an American, but we've been thinking of her as British for 9 books, because she's been over there. It's sort of hard to, and so it's interesting to see what's going on through the lens of her as an American, but she's almost an expat, coming back to America. So I thought that extra layer was
like that insider outsider situation.
I did. Yeah. And one of the things I loved in your book, Jeff, was, and you didn't mention it as one of the motivating emotions, but aside from anger and grief, I think you have to give curiosity a bit of a hello, because especially the woman with the solid marriage, she has to have been driven by, among other things, just gone mad with curiosity, wondering why her husband wasn't in New York.
Right.
I mean, that's really,
They trusted each other with very dark secrets from earlier in their life, and then he kept another secret from her. And I think, she definitely know what the answer.
There've been a couple of books about people who died like on an airplane flight, and the person sitting next to them was not anybody that they were supposed to be next to, or they were going to a destination that nobody expected. And I always think that sheer curiosity is one of the impelling emotions for investigating. It's like, why was he there with that person?
Well, I think writers, especially crime writers, tend to be highly curious people. And when Susan was describing her process, and that so much of what she starts with is asking herself questions, and
what if,
and who and why and how, and just writing down everything she knows about every character and then laying that out visually. It's because we want to get to that answer. We don't know the answer when we first think of the very seed of the idea of the book. And even if we know an answer, it's a very simple answer. We don't know it with all the complexity of the characters and the plot wrapped around it. So I think curiosity is that our curiosity probably bleeds into our characters.
I often think that what distinguishes authors from not authors is people who just can't stop asking, what if? You know, one person can walk into a room and just accept it, and the next person comes in and says, what if? You know, and off you go into a story. Patrick, let me summon you back from the darkness. You probably, this is so much fun. It's like Shakespeare. Here he comes. Right. Ariel or Caliban, take a vote.
Yeah.
So
What a great discussion. Yeah,
it
it's
is,
funny.
though.
I've been thinking about, I've been fascinated, Susan, also with Germans in Hollywood. You know, there's that whole group that fled. You think most notably of Fritz Lang,
Yes.
who brought that whole German expressionism with him into all
Yes.
those movies, Metropolis, M, and Bertolt Brecht, and people like that in the theater. There's, it's a great source is James Ellroy. Reading his novels, he really digs under the surface of a lot of that. I've learned a lot from his books as well.
We have questions?
We do have questions, yes. Let's see. Okay, Greg asks, Jeff, how long does it take you to write a book? Do you take a break between books or dive right into the next one? This is probably good for both of you.
I don't take a break really between the books. I tend to try to dive right into the next one, just because it's hard to write a book a year. And I have a job, a day job, and it's just a challenge. So I have to be very thoughtful about my time and try to be as productive with the time that I have. So I may be like writing down a lot of ideas, but I am writing down a lot of ideas. I might take a couple of days off after the book's turned in. But then I also usually have an idea of what the next book is going to be. So is that the whole question? Did I get it right?
I think that's right. Do you allow yourself a cigarette?
I allow myself a glass of Malbec.
Yay.
That would be.
Susan, what
How about
about
you,
you?
Susan?
Oh, yeah. So right now I'm deep into research and on, I think, chapter 3 of the next untitled book as I'm, putting that. So I'm talking to you all, about the Hollywood Spy, but really my mind is just sort of taken up with all these things for the next book. So it's kind of hard to switch gears, and like Pub Week especially, it's tough because you're doing so much for the book that's coming out. But really, like in my heart, I want to be working on the next book.
Yep, you've already moved on. Actually, that's one of the reasons that we have conversations with authors. Over 30 years, I have seen more authors just freeze when somebody asks them a question about the book we're talking about because they've already moved on. It's just,
Right.
it's so hard.
50,000 words into the next one.
That's right.
And so
We're about to go on vacation actually, and I have like my whole writing schedule planned out. I'm going to be writing every morning. There's a little porch with a screened-in porch, and that's going to be my writing porch. So,
Sounds
Have you had
wonderful.
any Hollywood interests, Susan?
yes, bizarrely, it's been such a long, strange journey. So the Maggie Hope series has been under contract with various people and production companies. I think 4 different people and production companies over the years. And right now it's with Warner Brothers Pictures, and it's being developed for television, and they have a pilot script and they are pitching it to the networks, and it got sort of held up because of COVID. But now they're starting up with pitching again, because they're not just COVID, but there were a lot of people sort of shuffling in and out in the networks. So they wanted to wait until everything was sort of back to normal. But yeah, so fingers crossed. You never know.
How about you, Jeff?
We do have some interest in Ambush of Widows from 2 prominent female television producers, which was really nice. And I've just had kind of like an initial discussion with them. Collision, I have multiple standalones that are under option. The SamCap Collision is under option, and they have the financing for it to film it. They were supposed to start filming in South Africa right before COVID hit. And so they still have the financing. They have to regroup and figure out when filming can start again. what else? The Sam Capra books are with two guys who are well-known producers for both network and streaming, and they have a showrunner selected, and they are working on the pitch for that. And it's a well-known showrunner. And then what else is there? Trust Me, which was is a 10-year-old book and never had any film interest, has been optioned by a producer who said, I wanted to find a book about people trying to hunt bad guys online, and you wrote this book like 10 years too early. But he said, I read a bunch of them and I liked yours the best. So, and then Panic, which I had been developing as a television series with the Weinstein Company before all of that, before they stopped, I'll just say, before all that stopped. It's with another production company now, but I don't know how it will move forward. I'm not really involved in that.
Well,
So I've had a bunch of things just because of having standalone sometimes opens a few more doors than what a series will do. But then I also think a series is easier to sell than the standalone.
Series for a TV show. Yeah.
Well, streaming has really changed things, I mean, this is an absolute golden age for taking books into visual, whether in serial television suits a lot of things better than a movie. I mean, there are some books that really you just see the movie. We just did an event for Falling, for example. And when you read Falling by Newman, her debut, it's a movie. I mean, it absolutely is a movie. But then other things, look at the success of Bosch, for example, or, or the Joe Pickett books are coming online, or we're going to get Jack Reacher, not Tom Cruise, and whatever. I think it's wonderful. It's a great chance for you all to reach a bigger audience. And even if they screw it up, you still have your books. I mean, that's the important thing to remember, right? Whatever they do with the adaptation, the books are still the books.
Absolutely.
Well, when I was writing the adaptation for Panic, I couldn't leave it just as it was in the book. It would not have worked as a television series. There were things you would have to change in it to make it work visually, just because the medium's different. So I was like, I feel like I'm rewriting the book when I was trying to write the series. So, but it is, I agree. And it's just such a great way for so many authors to reach new audiences and to see their work given this new kind of treatment that the streaming services can bring. That just wasn't possible when a television series had to be 22 episodes when we only had network, and the cables weren't doing so much of that, so.
Seems like there's an insatiable demand for new stories, and there's great diversity in stories too. All kinds of different shows are being produced. Very cool. Here's a classic question from Julie. She says, who are your favorite authors?
Pick 2 or 3.
Pick 2 or 3.
She didn't say dead or alive, so I think.
No, you can do dead authors. That's always safe.
Dead authors is always safe. You go ahead, Susan. You want to go?
No, Jeff, you go. Go ahead. Okay. No, I'll say. I was actually just thinking of the other day of how much I loved Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn, and I know everyone talks about Gone Girl, and as they should, but for me, it's Sharp Objects, and I think it's the combination of a sort of likable yet unlikable protagonist, and I just think it's so tight. Like, it's pretty perfect the way it's structured, and it's gorgeous, and it's evocative, and it's just kind of everything. I love it. So that would be something, I don't know, that would be like a desert island read for me.
I think I am going to lean in on authors who are no longer with us. I'll say one, Tony Hillerman, who I came to kind of late as a reader, but I just thought those books were so remarkable and so enjoyable and so compelling. Josephine Tey is a favorite of mine, and what, Barbara?
We actually love her so much that J.T. Ellison and it was Val McDermott and I and Dana Stabenow and Sujata Massey. We did a whole hour conversation on Zoom just about Josephine Tay.
Oh, see, I didn't realize that. I would have loved to have seen that.
I'll send you the URL because you can watch it.
I love her books. And I'm sometimes surprised when I meet people who say, oh yeah, I'm a hardcore mystery reader, and they are not familiar with her work. And then I always turn into this evangelist for them because I feel like she wrote it's like her books are similar, yet they're all different. And just the resolution and the character depth and just the structure of them, I just think they're all little masterpieces.
They were all about reputation. If you think about it, every single one of her books, Miss Pym Disposes or The Franchise Affair, or, I think they're just brilliant. And certainly she pioneered Trust No One in a sense.
Yes. Yes.
I'm always sad that she doesn't leap up when we talk about the golden age. It's always Christie and Sayers and all, but I think Tay belongs right there.
Yep, I totally agree. Yep.
Me too.
All right, Patrick, we got consensus there. Do we have anything else before we sign off?
Just a few quick things. Laura points out, you may know this book. She just says there's a really good book about the Zoot Suit riots by Eduardo Pagan, or Pagan probably. Murder at the Sleepy Lagoon. Do you know it?
Oh, I do know it. Yeah, that the Murder at the Sleepy Lagoon takes place before the novel, but it sort of sets the tone for all of the conflict for the riots and then for all of the conflict. So Laura, yes, I read it, and I can't believe more Americans don't know about that chapter of our history. It's interesting to me.
I've heard the song Zoot Suit Riot by the Cherry Pop Daddies, but I didn't know it was an actual riot. I just thought they were, I don't know what I thought they were talking about.
Let's see, Michelle says something very kind. She says, you all look wonderful. My question is, are you excited to do live events again?
Oh, yes. Yes. Yep. Oh my gosh. Jeff, what about you?
Yes.
Yes. I want to see people.
I'm still nervous about it. But the time is going to come, and I think it will be really great to connect with. This has been a great way to connect with readers who don't live near the bookstores and get to have an experience. But yeah, it'll be nice to have like normal book events again and go to the bookstores. I mean, because when I come and sign at Poison Pen, I need it like an hour beforehand to shop, right? And
Absolutely.
to see what everyone's recommending.
And then there's dinner, I mean, because dinner is always part of our experience. And I've had so many authors say, dinner. Actually, we did our first live event on Tuesday.
Oh, great.
And it went very well, but we did, and I found it interesting. We did ask people to come masked because there really is no way to verify whether people have been vaccinated, and we decided that would be more controversial. So we didn't have anybody who came. We had Patrick, 35 or 40 people. Everybody was really nice about it, and we had a great time. And then I put a picture on Instagram, and it was also in Shelf Awareness, and you can see that the audience was masked, and you can't believe the snarky comments, that people got. And I thought I wanted to write back and say, our store, our rules, just don't come. But I didn't want to start a war on Instagram, so I kind of let it go. But I thought that was so interesting that, the people who came were perfectly comfortable with it.
Right.
And so are all of us, because the staff is masked and all. Only the author and I were not, because obviously we had to talk. And then, outsiders, I like to think they were not book people. I like to think those people weren't really readers, right? We're snarky about it, like it was a political statement or something. So I do think those are things we have to navigate going back to live, is how it's going to be run and what people will be comfortable with and how safe it is. But our experience was lovely. So we have another one coming up. We have 2 coming up in August, and then I think we already have 5 booked for fall. So I do think that you're going to see a lot more of it. But just think about, how you're going to feel, how comfortable you will feel doing it, and decide. And that's all before we know about the variants and whether everything's going to shut down again anyway. And the whole question is academic for a while. Who knows? Patrick, didn't you think it was a nice experience on Tuesday?
I did, yeah. It was It was great, I mean,
And we'd forgotten our mojo. I mean, I forgot we actually needed pens for the authors. We had the camera under an air conditioning vent that turned out to come loose. So that, the
we were a
audio
little
was like
rusty.
that's why I went and turned the air conditioning off here, because I thought, oh my God, we're going to recreate, the broken vent in the bookstore. And we were really off our game because we haven't done it for a while. I mean, we were really polished. And then we quit. So we've got to practice our end of it in addition to the
But then
authors.
with this setup, I can do it in like 2 minutes. Get it set up, get it on Facebook. Now I've got that down to a science, but the in-store ones we're going to have to ease back into.
Yep.
And they have a different energy. The conversations can have a different. I love on all these Zoom programs. We can go off into some really interesting areas that we might not in front of a live audience, for better or for worse, sometimes. But
Or we don't have time because
Yeah.
the signing part of a live audience takes so long that oftentimes you truncate the conversation in order to deal with that part of it. But I know that people miss it. They miss being able to have photographs with the authors. They miss being able to tell you stories. I loved your book, all that kind of thing. Is missing for them. So I think it'll be great, but we're going to keep Zoom events too. Because what are the odds that we could have had both of you in Scottsdale together tonight? I mean, the travel
Right.
considerations, the whole thing,
Right.
oftentimes is just completely ridiculous. So I think Zoom has been a fabulous tool, and we're going to use it going forward. International authors, we've done a ton of stuff with Australian authors and British authors, and I have another Stockholm author coming up, and Iceland, and can't do that easily. And I think it'll be fun, to do both Zoom and live events. And you guys will probably do those too. Be great. Anyway, anything else, Patrick, before we sign off?
Wendy has the last word. She says, "I'm so glad to hear that because I'm in Canada."
Well, there you are.
Yeah,
Canada.
we'll keep
Yep.
doing them
All
for you.
right, Andy.
Well, thank you both. It's really been a treat to talk to both of you. I'm glad I made it to Santa Fe and was sitting here in the kitchen, right instead of my office. It's been great. So Susan's book, The Hollywood Spy, the signed copies are on their way. And honestly, I think we only have 3 or 4 uncommitted copies. So if you're really interested, grab one quickly. Jeff's wonderful book, An Ambush at Widows. Also, we have autographed copies at the store. There'll be a podcast as soon as my husband gets around to it, probably tomorrow or Sunday. So if you know people who've missed the conversation and would like to just listen to it. And Rob turned over today 100,000 downloads. Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
I am so pleased that part of this whole, which we can do with Zoom, has just turned out so well. And the video will live forever. So if you missed it or somebody who would like to have seen it tonight and missed it, it'll be on our Facebook video page, and you don't have to belong to Facebook to watch it. So have a wonderful evening. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. Thanks so much, guys.
Oh, thank
Good
you,
night.
Susan.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank you so
Barbara.
much. Good night.
Good night.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.